Welcome to the Mother of All Grief. Today we're going to be talking about Maren's story and Cathy's journey through Maren's diagnosis with Leigh's disease. So, Cathy.
Yeah, well, we were just kind of talking about, we've got lots of topics that we want to talk about.
Yep.
And we didn't really know where to start. We chose to start with our healing and what that meant. But I also kind of think that we should just tell our stories a little bit so people know where we're coming from.
How we got here.
Yeah, and just even to make somebody feel seen if they're struggling with the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that they know that they're not alone.
So Maren's story is a pretty lengthy one.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with a terminal illness, that's a long journey. So walk us through it.
Yeah. So Maren was my second baby. I really, Ada was a good baby. At first, anyways, breastfeeding is kind of hard. And so when Maren was trying to breastfeed right off the get-go, I was just like, something's off. Like, something's different with this baby. She doesn't have any suction. And everyone's like, oh, some babies just don't know how to suck. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I just feel like there's something. So we went through this whole thing of the tongue tie and everything. But you just have this I'll never forget, because she was 10 days old. And we were out at the lake at Scott's parents' house. And I was just like, I think that there's something maybe wrong with her. And I remember, I can't remember if it was his mom or dad, and coming from a good place, but don't say that, and I was just like, no, it doesn't mean that I love her any less, but I actually think that there's something wrong. And they're just like, oh no, she's good, Cathy. And I was just like, but she would fall right off the breast. She wouldn't have any, when a kid breastfeeds, they're your nipples so long.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't happening. So I was just that was my first instinct of something's not quite right. But of course, you carry on and you're okay, I'm crazy. I'm just a postpartum crazy mom, whatever. But I was fine. And so months later, Maren just wasn't growing as fast as Ada did. And so I would go back to the doc and I'm like, she just doesn't eat enough. And she doesn't, something's wrong. And he was just like, okay, well, I think she's just small. That's okay. She's fine. And then being having my background in massage school, I remember learning about genetic conditions, and Maren had really furry wrists and ankles, and her back was all fuzzy. And I remember learning that genetic kids had this. And so it was something that was just that internal, intuition that's just something's. And he would just roll his eyes, whatever. And we'd carry on and whatever. So she was never this 9-month-old that, when they kind of stand and they walk, they let go of things to stand on their own. And she just wasn't doing that. And so we were hey, after 12, 15 months, okay, we're going to go to physio. So it's okay, we'll go to physio. And I'm just I just think that there's something wrong, because she was quite shaky. She had a few different things that we were kind of finding were just off. And our physio was amazing. She was so such a gift in our journey. And I just was noticing her change. She needed to get glasses at around 18 months, and her eyes were quite bad. But my eyes are bad. And it just there was just as we got closer, my mom instinct was there's just something that's wrong. And Scott would just be well, did you take her back to the doc? And I was just yeah, he keeps blowing me off. It's not a thing. And I was just so I was starting to get frustrated. And even the physio was well, we've been doing everything that we can, Kath. Everything's okay. It's just everything that I can think of. But she's so bright, so she was hitting those milestones that it was just some sort of a body thing. And she's I just don't know what it could be. Because often physios are quite bright. They know what they're talking about. So anyways, we had planned a family holiday. Or no, I guess before that I got in touch with the pediatrician. Finally, it was this whole big thing. I guess this was quite a big turning point for me, that I went to see the doctor. Because that would have been November of 2017, and I'll never forget how he treated me. And I was just I think that there's just something wrong. And he was leaned back on his little stool like this, and he was as far as I'm concerned, Cathy, I'm not saying you're wasting my time, but there's kids, we're more concerned about kids that are too big than kids that are too small.
Wow.
And I just remember being you're wrong.
That's awful.
It was like,
Wow.
I'll never forget, like, just how he like sat and like, and we had a good relationship. I'd been a doula for quite a few years, so I'd done lots of births with him, and I was just like, I was tired. Like, I was just like, no, you're wrong. Like, there's something wrong with my kid. I've had another one. Like, I know it. That's just like
Right.
something screaming at me. So, I actually went back to my old doctor, like my previous doctor before I had the kids, and she was amazing. And she just said, Cathy, this list of things that you have going on is a lot. And she was just like, her being 19 months old at this time, not walking, is reason to send you to a pediatrician, let alone this list.
What were some of the symptoms on that
So,
list?
like, yeah, I had a list on my phone. I'm going to get it. If that's okay.
Yeah.
I did find it. I'm like, she's still really small. She was quite weak and she shakes a lot. She had like diastasis recti, so her abdomen was kind of open. I don't know, you hear of that in like pregnant people, like after women are pregnant. So it was just kind of like when she'd do a kind of like an ab crunch, you could see like a triangle. And she didn't eat a lot, so she would like struggle with like chewing, and then she would just like swallow it whole because it's almost like she was too fatigued to like eat. She puked quite a bit, and when she would cry, her lips would turn blue.
Oh gosh.
And she wasn't a great sleeper. So it was just like her eye stuff, like I have like her hairy wrists. Like it sounds so silly, but and she often just had like a stunned or like expressionless like look on her face. And it was just like just different. Like
you knew.
Yeah, I think that there was just something that was just like, I don't know. And I was just sad for moms that like maybe were going through that same thing and they didn't have the backbone that I did to be like, no, you're wrong. you know? And so that made me just really sad that. So anyways, finally I got a referral because of course my doc was great. And she just said, go back to that doc and just ask for a referral because I'd like all those charts. Like, and he gave it to me when I just like demanded that I wanted this referral to a pediatrician. But then the pediatrician also was like kind of like hands tied, like lovely, lovely man. But then you see this little girl that was like sitting there eating raisins during the appointment and like playing with puzzles and doing like she was bright. And so it just confused everything. So when you're talking about rare disease, and it's not like, because I never want to feel like I'm making people become like hypochondriacs or like to be like, you know, like alter, because I think that all of us moms just worry.
There's a difference between, I think, being paranoid and having an intuitive feeling.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that a mother, I mean, does it get more intuitive than that? You know your child.
Yes. And like when
anyone.
And every day that you're just like, oh, Ada would grow out of her clothes faster. And so, you know, when you're like going through the clothes, this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit. Like Maren was wearing clothes out, you know, when you're just like, why are we still in this size? You know, like those kinds of things were just like, that would bother you every day that you get your kid dressed.
Yeah.
So we went swimming. And so this was like the beginning of April 2018. And so I had also found out in March that I could self-refer myself to like Wascana and Regina. So it was like, I think that's like a kids program, a children's program. And then they have a whole board of people like assess these kids because in order to see like a neurologist in Saskatchewan, like it was just because I'm like, I think I need to see a neurologist because of the shaking had gotten so much that I was like, I feel like it's something she needs a neurologist. That's like, I just like my instincts were saying that was the case. And, but you're waiting forever. So the pediatrician was in agreement. He's like, you know what, you actually might do a better job with that board than what I can do. He's like, but I'm trying on my part and whatever. And we'd taken the girl swimming for Ada's birthday. So it's beginning of April. And Maren had her glasses off and it was like her face was different. Like something had shifted and like she just looked different. And I was just like, I went back to the pediatrician and I'm bawling. And I was like, I just need your help. Like something's wrong with my kid. And that's sad. But like, he's just like, we're doing the right things. Like, it's just like, she's okay. And I was like, I don't know. She's not eating much. Like, whatever. So then we were planning a family holiday. So we were going the end of April that year to Florida with friends. And the day before we left was this like significant day. So Maren had physio that morning. Ada was at pre-K. And the physio was like, Kath, Maren's really shaky today. And I was like, I know. This is how she is some days. Like when she's like, you really need to see a neurologist. And I was like, I know. Like I've been saying this for months. Like this is what. And she was like, okay, well, she kind of like shooed me out, and which isn't usually like. And I was like checking in for our flights. I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, should we be going? And she was just like, no, like go enjoy your trip. She's like, but I'm just going to call and see what I can do. Like, and so she did. And she called the neurologist that she had a good relationship with. And so when we landed in Florida the next day, I have all of these messages on my phone. Please call the General Hospital in Regina. We're getting your kid in for an MRI stat. And I was like, what? Like, is she going to be okay? Like, all of a sudden, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so she was she was only like less than 2 at the time. So we're trying to get her to eat. And she was like, that age, they don't want a bottle anymore, but you're trying to like feed them. And we were at Busch Gardens, and she hit like a crisis point. And so we had like this is the scariest day. And her breathing was just being affected. And she was just like, not doing well. And I thought it was the sun. I'm like, maybe she's allergic to the sun. Like, what's going on here? And so I was calling the insurance company to be like, what do we have to do to go to a hospital? Where do I go from here? Like, and so the guy on the phone was so awesome. And he's like, no, you guys have good insurance through Scott's work. And there's actually a hospital that's like 8 minutes. If you're better off to just drive than take an ambulance. And so I was like, Scott, let's go. And so Maren was like falling asleep, and like, I'm like, keep breathing. Like it was just like something out of a movie.
That's so scary.
It was so awful. And so we got to this American hospital where now I'm like, there actually is something wrong. Oh no, so I'm missing a piece. So when I was thinking about whether or not to take her to the hospital before that, I got this phone call from the metabolic clinic in Saskatoon. And so the metabolic docs, when I had her on the phone and I was just like, oh, we have an appointment with you. I heard that it takes 7 months to see you. She was just like, okay, we're going to see you on May 7th. Like that was in like 2 weeks, not even. Wow. And so I was like, oh shit, we're in trouble. Like this is, I'm like, I do need to take her to the hospital. Like it was just like that. And I remember, and she was just like, well, our job is to look for zebras. And so there's this term in like in rare medicine for sure, but like in like anything to do with medical stuff is when you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. So we want to see things that are common, that are always around.
Yeah.
But this metabolic clinic looks for those zebras. And I knew that I had a zebra. Like I've known for months, right? So we took her to the hospital. And of course, American hospitals are so much different than in Canada, where they're just like, we need to find out what's wrong. Look at this kid. And so it was just, I'm like, you just need to make her alive. Like, we have a flight home in a day and a half, like a direct flight, just like get us back to Canada. We've got an MRI there. So they admitted us and they kept us overnight. And it was like so scary. And for our friends that were on holiday with us, like it was just such an awful time. But, so we got her home, and the doc like let us go by saying like, if her diaper is not wet enough, just take her back in. Like you need to make sure that she's hydrated, because they called it like a failure to thrive crisis. And so they'd sent us home with paperwork. And she was like, I think that there's something metabolic going on here. And it was like a chronic lactic acidosis is what she kind of like, which when I looked it up, because of course we all Google it, and it's just like early childhood death. And I was like, oh, well, I don't think it's that. Your instinct is like that. So then when we got back home, got settled, we spent the night at home, and then the next morning went to the hospital in Moose Jaw here. And luckily, like, people know us, and so they were like, okay, we're going to transfer you to Regina. You need to be seen there. And I think that your daughter needs to be admitted, like she's not doing well. And so they were like, we need to get her like a feeding tube. And so it's actually one of my good friends is the one who was the nurse that was working in ER that day. And in Moose Jaw, of course, they don't have these like kid things. So she rigged up this like tube to like do an NG tube through her nose to be able to get her to some hydration, because her veins were so dehydrated that they couldn't get an IV. And it was just like such an awful, awful time. So I just like, people shouldn't have to go through all of this like trauma to like get a diagnosis, but this was our journey. So then we got admitted in Regina, and I remember again, the ER doc, that she was like, what's going on? This kid doesn't need an IV. She needs a feeding tube. She should have had a feeding tube months ago. And I was just like, back up. I was like, whoa, you need to stop, because I've been trying. And I was just like, this isn't what I need right now. I need you to save my kid. Like, it was crazy. And she was just like, oh, well, who's your doctor? And she just like was kind of like aggressive. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So anyways, we got the MRI that week. They wouldn't give me the results. And I was like, that's my report. Give me the report. I just want to read it. And they're like, no, we can't let you. And I was just like, it's mine. Like, yeah. I'd like to know what it says. And they wouldn't. Finally, the so like whatever they call them, like on call or whatever, the rounding pediatrician was that week. She's like, so we think that she has a mitochondrial disease. And I was like, what's that?
Wow.
And she's like, I can't really say anything, but you have an appointment next week with your neurologist and the metabolic doc. They'll talk to you about it more. And like, so that was like 3 days away or whatever. And I was like, so you got nothing? She's like, it's over my head. Like, I can't actually say much more. And I was just like, okay. So then I like looked up on my phone, of course, what's a mitochondrial disease, because I'd never even heard of it before. And it said, this first one was listed, and I was like, no, not that. And the second one listed was Leigh's disease. And so most kids with Leigh's disease have seizures. So minus that, it was like check, 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 check. Even down to lack of suction.
Wow.
Like, it literally said that on, it was just like low birth weight, have problems eating, they puke, they shake, like all, like, it was crazy. And I was like, oh my God, this is what she has. Like, what? Like, how is that? Like, what? It was so brutal. And so, of course, nobody could confirm or deny at that point. But I was just like, said to my family, like, and they're just like, no, like, it's got to be something else. So I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll find out. So I'll never forget that night in the hospital. So we were still admitted. And there was a nurse that was working. And she would have been like young, like a little bit younger than my mom, but like around that kind of age. And I just remember going out there and being like, hey, Maren's asleep, and I just need somewhere to ugly cry. Can I go somewhere? Can you just watch Maren so that I can go ugly cry? Because I just knew that it was like not good. Like, I knew at that point that we were in trouble, like that we were going to lose her. And that's just like so sad. So I just like ugly cried. And because it was like the middle of the night, my girlfriend was living in Australia at the time. And she's a physio. And so I just remember FaceTiming her and being like, you get the science. Like, I know you get it. And I think she was like out for a hike. Like, it was the craziest thing. But I was just so thankful that I could like cry with somebody that got it. But anyways, so we went to Saskatoon that next week, a couple days later. And I remember driving. The girls were both sleeping in the back of the van, and Scott and I were just talking on the way, like, okay, a wheelchair we can handle. We got this. Like, we got a wheelchair and a feeding tube. Like, we can do this. Like, we got this figured out. Like, she's going to be okay. We got this. And then we just stopped and looked at each other and we're like, we should be talking about gymnastics or dance. Like, hockey or baseball. Like, this isn't what we wanted for our kids. Like, to be like, I don't know. And so then when we got there, and with the neurologist and the metabolic doc, they were like, they just confirmed it. She's just like, so we think Maren has Leigh's disease. And I just like dropped my head. And she's just like, you've heard of it? And I was like, I looked it up. And she's just like, we think that's what it is. We need to do genetic testing to confirm it. But you might, see age 3, 4. Enjoy your time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And that was like May 7th, 2018. Yeah, it was crazy.
I don't have words. Yeah. So that was it. That was diagnosis day.
Yeah.
She was about just
almost 2. Yeah, she was going to turn 2 June 1st. So it was just like, oh, like, and then we have no way to treat this. There's no treatments. we have, it's basically ALS in a child. So you're going to see she's quite bright. We found out later that it's quite rare. Like, obviously, Leigh disease is rare. Even that doc had said that she'd only ever heard of it. I don't think she'd only ever seen maybe one other kid with it. There's been a couple now since then. But the palliative doc was in on that appointment too, because she was instantly assessed to us, hooked up with us. And she was amazing. And she actually walked us through so many things. So I'm very, very grateful for that palliative doctor to be there with all of those things. But yeah, like with a mitochondrial disease, there's not, you kind of you treat symptoms, but you can't fix the problem because her brain has holes in it ultimately. And there's places that are working and places that aren't. And so they eventually go into respiratory failure. And so they said that she would pass in her sleep likely, which we knew that she didn't sleep well and she would wake up kind of panicked. And that was what's happening. So like central sleep apnea is when the brain doesn't tell them, not like obstructive sleep apnea is something that's more common that people hear of. And there wasn't anything actually like obstructing it. It's just like her brain not telling her body. So it was a long couple of years of being scared every night. And then when she would sleep, then we're scared to go into her room because we're like, is she dead?
Yeah.
And then she would be okay. And then we're like, okay. Like, but it was just this roller coaster time of navigating this feeding tube and all of that kind of thing. So we pushed quite quickly for getting a G tube from her NG, like in her nose, to like her G tube surgery. And I remember them saying like, oh, well, we usually wait about 3 months to do this. And I was like, well, it's summer. And if this kid's going to pass away, like, we want her life to be full. So whatever needs this to not be taped to her face because I don't like it.
Yeah.
For her. And we need to go swimming. Like, she loves being in the pool and at the lake and all the things. So they did it for us. They got us in that June. And she did really well. And she really started to thrive. That feeding tube was like the best thing that could have ever happened to us for sure. And gave us so much time.
So I'm curious, you have an older daughter. How long did you wait before you told her about Maren? And how did that go?
That's a good question. I don't know. When, like, she knew. Like, she was there, you know? So there wasn't really a point of, like, keeping it from her. I don't know. I'd have to actually ask Scott I don't remember there being a significant thing, but I remember clearly she was only like 4 then.
Yeah.
And when she would be like, I'm like, okay, well, Maren's not doing really well. Because there was different times after the G-tube that we'd have to be admitted. And when anytime Maren was sick, they would almost admit us because treating her with fluids and antibiotics, like they were just really scared, like initially, of how we needed to treat her. And she knew the difference of like the faraway hospital, that it was kind of more serious versus like the at-close hospital. Right. Was like, okay, she's okay and I can go visit her there. And she was okay with that. And I mean, I'm so grateful for Scott's parents being around, and we have a big family support network. Sorry. That was able to help us with her so that we could both be present with Maren.
Was Maren ever aware of what was going on, like in terms of her being sick? Like, did she ever know that she was sick, or was this just the life that she lived and she was fortunate enough to have family that just helped her live it the best she could?
Yeah, like, she wouldn't talk about it. Like, she knew she had a G-tube, and she was, like, her energy was so, I don't know, she was such a special, she just took it all in stride, and we learned so much from her of just being like, okay, this is just the way it is. And like, gosh, she didn't like getting the button like changed when we'd have to do that, or there's some pieces that she would be but she was just like, okay, this is what we're doing. Like, she was just such a happy little light that. And the crazy part, like, so she would puke a lot if the feeds didn't go well, or like, it was all trying to figure out like what would make her not puke, and the time, like rain, like how fast you do it and whatever. And then we just still have like trying to have a normal life of like Ada going to hockey. And so then Maren would puke and we're like, okay, clean it all up and then let's get going. And we would still like haul all up and carry on, like to try to just live a normal life as much as it was hard. It was a lot. And because we wanted to help her so much, we had really reached out to find other doctors across the country that had seen this and had, so out in Toronto, there was a couple of metabolic docs and mitochondrial specialists. So we had went out there, and again, they were kind of the same thing. Like, it was interesting because each doctor was quite different. Versus the one was like, okay, well, you're doing all of the right things, and let's keep on. Like, you don't know how much time you have. Like, we have some people. I have one client that grew up and she's a lawyer. And we're like, what?
With Leigh's disease.
Yes. So clearly, like, learning back later, there's like different, like, varying pathogenic cases kind of thing. And he's just like, enjoy your time. Like the same kind of thing, but like he was very positive. And Scott was just like, I don't know about that. Like, he's just like, I don't want to get my hopes, because I left there feeling like super hopeful, because this is like this roller coaster of like, okay, maybe we're okay, because look at her, she's growing, and then we seen the other doc, and he was like, you realize this is a fatal diagnosis, right? And I was like, yeah, we know, but what can we do? And he's like, if you want to have healthy babies, like, we could help you do that too, because he's a genetic doc. And I was like, oh. But, like, a lot of people couldn't have heard that, but I was also like, okay. Like, and so at that point I was like, okay, well, I think we need a trach. Like, can we have if she has a trach, then are we good? Like, and then she'll just keep breathing? And he was just like, looked at me and he said, is the trach for you or for her?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh. And it was like
hard truth.
It was a hard truth, but I actually was like super grateful that he'd said that, because I was just in fix-it mode. Yeah. So much of being like, okay, I can do whatever I can do to like help my kid. But when he said that, I was like, I started to grieve the trach. Like, that idea of that I could fully, like, we aren't promised time. And I feel like we kind of grew up in a generation that thought that it was owed to us, like that we all just, like, when things are good, or sometimes life is just going to be good and we just have to wait for that. And instead of like missing the journey of like that presence piece of like, okay, well, she's good right now, so let's just like live in the right now. Mm-hmm. And so that's hard navigating, like, this griefy anticipatory pending doom, because that's all it was. But then you're also like, she's so cute right now, and she was so awesome, and I have my 2 girls just living together. But also it's like this dance around this pink elephant that's just so massive in the room all the time. Yeah. But yet Maren was so cute, and such a light of just being like full of like piss and vinegar all the time. Like, she was just so feisty, and she was like, okay, let's do this. And she's just like so happy and dancing around. Like, she was always so happy. Wow. That it was hard to not be happy around her.
Which is, I think, such a beautiful gift in such a horrible situation.
Yeah.
How did you go about navigating that anticipatory grief? Because I think that there's probably a really big difference between the grief after she passed versus the grief you experienced in those years prior.
Yeah. I think that it got us ready, like, but at the same time, nothing really can. But I did focus a lot on like that acceptance piece of like, I don't get to fix this, and I'm not in control of this. Mm-hmm. And even for us to make plans was really hard, because there was always so many variables of like, don't set these expectations, because then I would potentially be like disappointed.
You just really had to live in that present moment.
Yeah, for sure. And so Scott and I did that. We went on a trip. A friend of mine was getting married, and she had asked me to be a bridesmaid, and I was just like, I don't know that I can do it. Like, she was going to Mexico, and then I was like, you know what, Maren was doing okay. So I'm like, let's go. Like, this is early 2019. And I'm like, she's doing okay. Like, okay, I'm just going to book it. And then when I went to go book the trip, so this was like March, she was getting married in April. It was like $700 more to take Scott. And I was like, do you think that you could come too? Like, do you think that your parents can handle it? And my parent, like my mom, like, we'll figure it out. And they're like, go. Like, so we just made it for like 5 days and not a week. And we were like, let's just go. And we did. And it was so nice to just like not be medical parents for a little while, to just like, okay, let's like dive back into like marriage, because like, who are Scott and Cathy instead of just being like Ada and Maren's mom and dad. Like, and that was really amazing for us to have that piece, because we knew there's a rating that's like for medical or people, and you would know too, for like child loss or like medical parents, it's like 80% divorce rate, like a crazy, crazy high number. And we were just like, I don't want to be that. Yeah. Like, I don't want that to be us in our story. After having lost, to have so much more loss. So then we went, and when we came back, Maren had taken a bit of a turn. Like, Calvin had been sleeping with Maren, because we always had to have somebody sleeping with her. And he was like, she keeps on like reaching for the top of her pillow. And I was like, oh, she's opening her airway. She's having trouble breathing. And so then the docs had said, you probably have like 3 to 6 months. Like, and we were just like, oh, like she was just coming up to her 3rd birthday now at that point. So we're like, oh, we had just this high of like, okay, we're all doing okay. We haven't had a hospital stay in a little while. And then all of a sudden, crashing down of like, we need to have our wish trip. Like, she's going to turn 3 in June. We were hoping to have that wish trip then that fall. And we were scared that she wasn't going to make it. So rushed a bunch of things, and like, but then again, it like gave her life. And then she was good again. She's like, I want to go to school. So we put her in pre-K, and she wanted to go to school. And so we just had this whole like, okay, she's not going to make the summer. And then she does. And then she's going to go to school, and she's like living her best life. But then we were also scared of like germs, right? Like, you don't want your kid to be exposed to like all these kid germs. But I also was like, but Ada's going, and Ada's bringing it home. Like, why isn't Maren experiencing this thing? Because she loves kids, and like, she's got a job to do here to like be near all these people, and she loved it. And she got to go to school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many ups and downs, but I try and put myself in your shoes, and I just think to myself, like, I don't know if I would have been able to do all the things that you did, and you did them so beautifully. Like, I remember seeing the pictures of her on her wish trip. Oh my gosh, just the cutest little thing, and your little matching shirts, and like, what a gift. And to go to school, and in turn sharing her with so many people through that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that it would have been easier in a lot of ways to keep her in a bubble. Yeah. And I can see why people would do that. Yeah. And I'm so no judgment for those that do. But we just knew that Maren loved people. And she was like, loved to be near them. And she wanted to be part of, like, Ada's hockey was Maren's hockey. Like, so Maren was just like playing with all the other little siblings. And they were just as excited to see her as, she was them. And it was just like this beautiful, like, we just learned a lot from her. Like, she was just so happy all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. So this was around her wish trip. You said she was 3?
Yep. So that was 2019. Yeah, because you have to be 3 to get a wish, or to use a wish. So we were concerned that she wouldn't. And so we'd actually taken a trip earlier that year with my family to Disneyland as well. So we were there twice that year, which is so crazy. But I had a friend that had done a fundraiser with like necklaces. And so she'd sent us a bunch of money, which was so generous. And I was like, what are we going to do with this? And so it was crazy, because I'd actually, as random as it is, I ran into a girlfriend. I was getting my eyebrows waxed. And so was she. And she was like, Cathy, you inspired us, like, in your story with Maren. And she was just like, we're booking a trip to Disney. We're going at Christmas. And we're like, and I was like, what? And she was just like, we got to live this life. And I was just like, oh, wow. And I was like, we should go to Disney. Like, it was the craziest thing. And I was like, what if we don't make Maren's wish? And just like seeing my friend that day say that she was booking a trip. And I was like, you're right. Like, this is what, like, so other people are learning, and here we need to just like do it. And so we did. We booked a trip in 3 weeks and we just went. And we're like, let's just go. We'll figure out money after, like, let's just go. And so it was good. Like, it was just like, again, like that 2019 was a year full of memory making because we really thought that we didn't have time. And I mean, ultimately we didn't, but we didn't know that what COVID was coming, so we ended up taking like that trip, and then we were able to just really soak in that year, which was very, very cool. And then COVID, like, of course, the world shuts down, and but Maren was still doing well at that time. She was doing okay. There was quite a lot of regression that year, and then Scott got sick. So, and that's like a whole nother story. But Scott, I went into heart failure in February that year, right before COVID hit. And so luckily we moved in with his parents through COVID because I just needed help, like with all Maren's stuff and Ada not going to school and like all the craziness. So I was so grateful to have them helping. And Scott had an ICD implanted in his chest, so he wasn't able to go back to work. And so we just had a lot of change that year. But I'm also like grateful for the time to slow down and just like soak the girls in and us spending time together as a family, and we became a big family of just trying to navigate all of that. But it was a lot.
Absolutely. If you could give any advice to any other medical parents out there, just with your experience, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to like reach out for support. And to ask for help. Like, I think that was a big piece that was really hard for me as like a go-getter to just like learn how to do that. But once I did that, we were way, way more successful. Scott even like, and I reluctantly would ask for help, but Scott finally would be like, okay, if you're not sleeping all night, but you need sleep. So he would hire like friends of ours, like parents or to come over and spend the morning with Maren, which mornings were her best time anyways. And so they would sit and play with Maren, and I would go to sleep, and I would just sleep for 2 hours or whatever to just like, which like was hard to do that. Like, to say, I'm just going to check out here so I can go to sleep. But it actually made things so much better. And also gifted them with the gift of Maren to like spend time with her, which was really nice. But it's like asking for help is a big piece. Self-care, like for me, I've talked about before, like massages, and like I would go for counseling because sleep was a big piece that I needed in order to not be a psycho, because it's hard. It's so hard.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
No.
Right?
And I mean, I'm so lucky that Scott is so helpful, and that he would be like, I'm definitely the one that would like go figure it out, but then he would just be like, okay, tell me what I'm doing. And then he would just learn and do it, and was very supportive of that. And also just like when you have that piece of like that rock of a husband that was like, if I was like this emotional mess, then he was solid. And then if maybe he was having an off day, then I was solid. And I think that's kind of fortunate to have that. I know that we are fortunate in that way to have that through our marriage, but it's that asking for help, and it's like having hope amongst being realistic though too. So you're still like, I knew that I wasn't going to change our outcome at the end. But I just wanted to make it okay while we were going through it as much as we could. So sharing Maren, letting Ada's life be as normal as possible in amongst, her just not really understanding. But also like with kids, they don't know what they don't know. And so like, that's just what life looked like for us. But I do think in lots of ways, like Ada grieved a lot of what she wanted Maren to run and play with her, and Maren would run pushing her little shopping cart when she still could. But it is a lot of asking for second opinions, like being an advocate for your kid, because sometimes the doctors will do what's best for you, and I mean their hearts are always in the right place, I think, for the most part. But it also is bringing back that human piece of it. of being like, what if this was your kid?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and what, how would you want somebody to be treated?
Yeah.
And so it's like, sometimes you do have to take a step back and have that bigger picture look.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing this journey.
I know it's so long-winded. It's a lot, and I mean,
there's a lot to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And even like the regression, I mean, we'll say that for another day, but it is that big piece of that roller coaster. You know, things are going well, and then they're really scary. And then, oh, we're okay again. And then it's just kind of like bumping along that road.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as an outsider looking in, and as I watched you go through this, I just was blown away by your family's strength and just the number of people that you inspired and that Maren inspired.
Yeah, she sure did.
Because she was just a little firecracker, and I just think that as painful as I know this journey's been for you, I think there's been so many blessings in just having her, in just having that time with her, even though it was short.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yes,
thank you guys for listening. Make sure to send us any of your signs or stories of connection to themotherofallgrief@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.